Okay, so now we are recording, and so let me just reiterate of what we are gonna do so that it's getting recorded too. So we are building a control which will have one text box where users can enter the text, and then based on whatever the users enter the text, the control will count the number of characters and count the number of words that they're entering. Yes, the question is the demo control will be shared on GitHub repo. I yes, I believe the I had already shared this on GitHub repo, and I can share you the path in an email, follow-up email. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so now going back to the code. So first thing is we need to once we have the idea of what control we are going to build, you have to go to the tool, and let's load up the tool. Don't know what happened over there. Let's try again. This has never happened before. Okay. Sorry about that. My XM toolbox is always open. It has never caused an issue before. Don't know what happened now. Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's try to load this again. And there you go. Perfect. Okay, so now the good thing about this PCF custom control builder is you don't actually need to connect to the organization, right? Because we are just building the control locally. The only time you would need to connect to your organization is when you are trying to deploy your control to an instance. So in this case, I'm just going to select no, because I don't want to connect to any environment. I'm going to create everything local. Okay, now as I explained, you have to select your control location and you have to select your Widget Studio command prompt, which is a one-time setup. In coming releases, you might not wanna, you might not get an option to just select this. I would try to automate that in the future. But this is what we have for now. We have to select the control location and we have to select the Visual Studio command prompt location. And as I said on our last training session, that the control location normally I start with is with an empty folder. So I already have an empty folder created over here. So as you can see, come on. As you can see, there's nothing in this particular folder. So when the tool loads, it loads with no data in it. And you don't have to do new PCF control because it is already loaded with new. But in case if you have loaded something else and you want to refresh anything, then you can always click on new from blank. Okay, so now first thing is in the tool, we have to specify what the namespace of the component would be. So namespace is normally what namespace you would be using in your plugins, in your, let's say, workflow activities or any code that you are doing. It's the same namespace. So mine would be, I normally use Maverick dot controls. I'm going to say power Maverick dot controls. OK, so that's going to be my namespace. Dot demos or demos dot controls, and then the control name. So this control is going to be my character counter, right? So character counter. OK, and then the next thing that you want to select is the template, whether it is going to be field or dataset. Now the difference, as I mentioned before, is field is where you're replacing your attribute with your custom control, and dataset is where you're replacing your subgrid or a view with your custom control. So in this case, as I showed in the example, it's going to be the description field, right? So we're going to replace the field with our own custom control. So we're going to select field in this case, and that's it. 3 things, and you're all set. So you put this in and then hit the create button. Now what it's doing in the back end is it's going and running this pack Pcf Init command. Now pack Pcf Init command is initializing your Pcf project. So what it takes is it takes the name. So it takes this name, then it takes the template. Okay, something happened. So it takes a template, and it also takes the namespace. So 3 things: it takes the namespace, name, and the template. That is what we give here. And once it loads, then what we want to do is next thing is we want to run the npm command. So npm command is the next thing, but it failed for npm command. Let me just do new from blank. And field type and then create. Let's try again. Let's see if it works this time. It doesn't work still. I don't know what's happening. Controls.
Is it okay if we have the control name with spaces?
Oh, yes, you're right. I forgot about that. Your control name should not have spaces in it. That's the reason. Thank you. Okay, so as you can see, this framework was able to successfully create the project over here with that pack Pcf init. And as soon as the pack Pcf init command runs, the framework tells you to run npm install. But what I've done is I've consolidated those 2 commands in one button click, so you don't have to write 2 different commands. So once you run pack Pcf init command to initialize your project, you don't have to run npm install. The tool is automatically running that command for you. And what it does in the backend is, in the backend, it created this PCF project, and it initialized all these folders for you. And now it's installing this node module. So if I go to node modules, you can see the things are still getting installed. So if you keep it open here, you would see that this area would get the folders or the the projects or extensions would get installed over here as the npm command is executing in the backend. So once it completes its execution, you would see a lot of folders here. We'll have to just wait, and there you go. You can see that npm is still running, and npm is the one thing that takes long time to complete.
Is it just one-time activity or every time whenever we build or something?
It's a one-time activity per control. So every time you create a new control, you have to do npm install. So the framework is installing all the dependencies that it would need. Okay, so now our project is ready. And as you can see, there's no error message or anything written over here. So everything is fine. We have our project created. So now second thing is, and you just have to follow these steps. Okay, you don't have to think about what needs to be done next. You just follow these steps because buttons are ordered in the fashion that you normally proceed your process, development process. So now I would click on open in Visual Studio Code, and that would open in my Visual Studio Code. Okay. Now, as you can see, automatically opened Visual Studio Code with that particular folder location. So you don't have to worry about which folder location I need to open and all those things. Now there's an index file and there's a control manifest file. Okay. Everyone following until now? Are there any questions?
Issues creating control, actually.
Sorry?
I'm having issues creating control from the external toolbox, so I'm just trying that out again.
Okay. What's the error you're getting?
It's through the actually, let me check. I just restarted the external toolbox. Just try it out again, actually.
Okay. Anyone else having issues creating the control?
I'm installing, so I will let you know in a minute.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone else?
No. For me, it worked quite fine.
Good.
Yeah, same here. It's
Yeah, for me also it's good.
Awesome. Any updates, Jay? Or you're still on your XRM toolbox?
Yeah, I'm getting warnings actually. Funding. So it started npm install, and I got a few warnings. Warnings are fine, I guess, but I'm just waiting.
Yeah. You have to wait for that npm install to be successful. It will take some time, but yeah, you can ignore the warnings. These are because the framework is still using some of the old packages in the package.config file, so that's why. Yeah, and as Mama said, yeah, dev always ignores warning. Well, not always, but yeah. So let's go back to the code, and this is where the fun part begins. Okay, now you have the control, and as you can see, the namespace that you provided was added over here. The name of the control that you provided is part of the constructor, and also the display name. So you can actually give space in your display name in here. So you can change the display name whatever you want, but you can have a different control name, the backend name, the schema name, right? So I can have character counter training. And then I can keep the description as is. Now, in the manifest file, and okay, so what is a manifest file? Okay, so there are two files, right? As you can see, there's a manifest file, there's an index.ts file. So index.ts file is your starting point for your control, and your manifest file tells you the manifest data, the controls manifest, like what is the control name, what is the controls constructor, what is the version, what are different properties. So as you can as you know, in the last session I showed you a control where we were selecting different properties, right? 3 or 4 properties like subscription key, endpoint, and whatnot, right? And then the properties data type. So property name, so this is like a schema name or a name, right? Then your display name for your property, your description for your property, again, what is the data type for your property, and what is going to be the usage. So is it going to be bound to a particular field, or whether it is going to be an input? Remember how I told you that some of the controls needs to be binded to a particular record, whereas if you are giving a subscription key or an endpoint, you need users to input that data themselves. So in that case, your usage type would be input. So two options available on the usage. One is bound and one is input. Okay, and then required.
So, Dinesh, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So let's suppose you have one field which is bound field, right? And then you have 3 other fields which are part of the control itself. They are not part of the direct field. So let's suppose your control actually binds to one field, which is kind of going to change the behavior of one field, right? But then you have 2 additional input fields. they are not part of the CRM though. They are part of your control. So you would just consider them as input fields.
Yes, those would
Okay.
be input fields. Yeah, anything
Okay.
that you want users to modify, right? Or users to supply to make it
Yeah.
configurable from one instance to other instance. It is going to be configurable. Or if you're creating an ISV, then you want that that your control should be configurable by the users, by the end users, or functional consultants who are going to configure that control. So anything to do with that, and you can actually have more than two bound fields as well. So you don't have to necessarily have one bound field. You can have multiple bound fields and multiple input fields. In this case, properties. So you can have, I can have things like this. I can have this as input. And I can have two bounds and I can have two inputs. That's fine. Just my names should be different. My display names should be different, and types could be different or types could be same. Doesn't matter. But by default, in model-driven apps, by default, the first field, it's going to bind automatically to the first field. So if you have said that this is a zip code, right? And in CRM, if you are going to add this control, then by default, whenever you add it to one single attribute, it will bind it to this particular zip code. So whatever it finds the first bound property, the control will be bind it to that particular property.
Okay.
Okay, and there's no way you can change it. So you need to make sure that which attribute are you going to replace the control with?
Yeah. So the input properties over here, they does not need to be a field in CRM, right?
Right.
But the bound fields, bound properties, they have to be like, kind of override behavior of the field in CRM. So if you have two fields, so right now you're talking about one field, right? What if you have, let's suppose I'm thinking about address control, right? There is no such a composite address control in CRM, right? In the model-driven apps, for example,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I have state, I have zip code, and I have country or whatsoever. I would like to bind this control to all those fields actually.
Yeah.
So can I bind it in one control?
No. So you can only replace one attribute in CRM. You cannot
Okay.
replace a group of attributes. So so that's why I said that when you're replacing an attribute, so in this case, let me just put some data here. The key. So let's say we have zip code, we have country, we have API key, and we have another key as 4 different properties. Now, when you go to your form designer or form editor and you go to a field, so for example, and I'm going to go to the classic editor as usual because we cannot add custom controls on this as of today. Sorry about the load time. Internet is not good today. Okay, so now my form is loaded. Now, as you can see here, this is my zip code and this is my country code, right? Now, if I have to replace the zip code with the control, and I already have a weather widget over here. As soon as I add it, you'll see that this is not editable. It just takes the first property that it finds and assigns it to this particular attribute in CRM. Okay, and you cannot change this. You can bind it to 2 different fields, but then it won't replace the country code that is already existing on the form. Okay, so what I can do is I can add this to a country code, and I believe I have a country code here, and I'll put something for here. It's not going to work because this is not the key that I want. And I'll just save it so you guys can see how it looks like and what I'm talking about. Okay, so here, as you can see, it doesn't show any control because it errored out. But the country code is still there. It did not replace the country code. It just replaced the attribute that you added the control on. You can bind it to multiple attributes in the property section, but those attributes are not getting replaced on the model driven app.
Okay, makes sense. But in case of like if you would like to have multiple inputs and instead you just don't want to use like CRM, so in the address control, for example, you have like country, state, and or state whatsoever, right? 3 different fields. So it will be bind to one field, but those 2 other fields that you have in your control, you don't need to drop them on CRM technically, right?
You need to put them on the form. They need to be on the form. No, it could be in the hidden section,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
they need to be on the form. And you don't need to bind it. The reason is because I'll
I
test it
think
out tonight.
I'm getting your point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'll test it tonight. But I remember correctly a few weeks ago, I didn't have the field on the form, and my control wasn't working.
Oh, okay. So those
So
fields needs to be actually on the form.
Right. Yes.
And those fields has to be bound fields, right?
Yes, those fields will
Okay.
be bound fields.
Okay,
Correct.
makes sense. Makes sense. Complete makes sense. Okay. All right. Makes sense. Perfect.
Okay, so coming back to our control, and any other questions?
Yes, so why we need to bind our field to bind our control to multiple fields if we are not actually getting data from them directly?
We are getting data from them.
Or even if we are getting data directly, we can just get it by using like the input only.
Well, the input is not going to serve the purpose, because if I go back here and let me show you this control that I have, the input is not going to let you bind to a field. Input is just a free text. It's a free text. I can put anything what I want here.
Oh, but like bind to a value on a field.
Yes. So that, yes. So when you do an input, you have an option to bind to a value of a field. But the reason you want to do a bound is, let's say, let's go to an example here. So let's say your control would also have input capability as well, right? You change the country or you change the zip code. You want that data to get sent back to CRM. See, your control is again, it's kind of an HTML thing where HTML is on its own and CRM is on its own. CRM doesn't know what's going on in HTML. It's a similar kind of thing. So CRM, whatever inputs or whatever control you have added, let's say you have added a drop down for country and the user changed the drop down for country. CRM needs to know that something got changed in the control, right? If it's an input type, then data cannot be sent back to CRM. If it's of bound type, only then the data can be sent to CRM back. So it's a two-way communication only if the usage type is bound.
Okay, but what about like, just like when we saw just now on the form, when it says bind the input field back to the CRM control, right?
Yeah. So
if we do that.
Yeah, we are going little ahead of ourselves.
Okay,
So
okay. Sorry about that. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
that's
Okay.
yeah, that's fine.
Apologies.
Yeah, so we'll go to in depth of how this bound and input type differs. But let's just proceed with what example I'm going to show today. Okay.
Perfect.
So in our case, and I know I'm switching gears little because we were having a good discussion, but I'm gonna come back to that bound and input again because I want to show you what happens in the backend. So and just to give you an idea, if you can see, there's a folder here called generated. Now, if you expand that folder, you'll have this manifest type d.ts. If you open this, there is some input and output. Okay, just remember this. Now we'll come back to this later on. Okay, so now I'm going to put input text. So this is my description, or let's say input description. Okay, I'm going to keep the same name on my display, on my description, and I'm going to change this to text area for now. Okay, and then we are going to do bound, and this is going to be true. Then my second is going to be my character limit. This is just to show you, I'm not going to use this, but show you what that input type looks like. And again, this is going to be single line text, and this is going to be input. And this is going to be required as false. Okay, so we have this properties created, right? Now, whenever you do any changes in the manifest file, you have to make sure that you have to build your project. Okay, so in this generated file, if you see right now, your property says it's sample property, but in the manifest file you have changed the property. So let's just go and just build this. Okay, so let's build this and see what happens. Building, and you can see the status over here.
So it's going to change the name, like the namespace in TS-file manifest, the manifest TS-file, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So now if you go back to our manifest file, you'll see that in the inputs we have two new properties, and it removed that sample property because in our manifest control manifest file we have added input description and character limit. Correct? Following me? Yeah. So now in the manifest file, we see in the inputs we have input description and character limit. But in the output, we only have input description as the property. We don't have the character limit as the output. Output is nothing but output to CRM or output to CDS. It could be model driven app or it could be Canvas app. So what we are going to return from the component, we are going to return input description back to either model driven app or in Canvas app. That is defined based on the usage type. If your usage type is input, then nothing will be returned. So if I change this to input, it's not going to return anything. And in model driven app, you need at least one bound field, by the way. Okay, so one bound field and the input is not going to return. So in your someone asked me the question of what if we keep country as the input type? Well, you can keep country as the input type, but if your control is going to return something back to CRM, then you need to make sure that you're putting usage as bound. Also, if it is input, then user has the ability to input any data and not bound to a field. So you need to handle that in your control. So if you know for sure that you want data from CDS or from CRM, then always make sure that you're putting it usage as bound. Got the difference?
Okay, that's how you're changing the behavior of the field, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So second thing is off type. So off type, now we have put single line text area, but for us sometimes in a description or we wanted to count the characters on a single line text field or a multi-line text field. So how do we handle that? Because those are like a group of data types, right? So for that, we have to use this type example that Microsoft has already provided. So we just copy this type group. and create our own type. I'm going to give my type name as text. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put single line text as one data type, single line text area as another data type, and multiple. Okay, so these are going to be my data types. Now, how do I identify what the data types would be? As there's no IntelliSense, there's no good way of identifying it. You can always go to the tool and help, and you can go to Microsoft Docs for custom component, and that would launch the help section. And in the references section, you would see that there's a manifest schema references, and this would have the type. And the type, you would see that there's currency and all this fields that are available. So it has two sections of value, the data types that are not supported and data types that are supported. Okay, so you can only use the values from the data types that are supported. So here you can see single line text area, and multi-line or multiple. Sorry, multiple. I think so. I've added multiple.
So sorry, Dinesh, one question quickly. Why we need to use type group actually here?
Yeah, so this particular property is right now only supported for single line text area.
Yes.
But we want this property to support on multiple data
field types.
So instead of this, instead of supporting it only to type a text area, we are going to create a type group, give a name as text area, and then change this to say of type group. Of type is only going to support one single data type, but of type group is going to support multiple data types based on the type group that you have defined here. So you take this name and then give it here. So now this property that I've defined now supports multiple data types instead of single data type.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, and again, because we have changed the manifest file, it's always a good idea to go and rebuild
it.
Yeah. Okay. While it's building, I can go ahead and then do some changes in the code. Okay, so let's move on to our index file. Okay, so in the index file, we have as the framework is initiating the PCF project, and let me show you this PCF project. So here you can see that there's a file project called PCF project. Okay, so PCF project was initiated by the framework, but it went ahead and then created this control manifest file. So it created this folder first of all, which is the name of your control, and then inside that it created these two files, control manifest file which we are seeing here and the index file that we are seeing here, right? And then the index file that gets generated has some pre-built functions. It has the init function. I'm gonna mute. Okay. It has the init function. It has the update view function, get outputs, and destroyed function. So init function is the first function that gets called when your control loads. So any initialization that you want to do, like say you want to initialize your controls UI or web API calls or anything that you want to do as part of the initialization, you can do it here. It only gets invoked once when the control loads. The update view is getting invoked every time the control is getting updated, or notify output changed is there's a function called notify output changed, and when that is invoked, then update view would get invoked. If the control is getting resized, then the update view will get invoked. Or if the property values are changing. So for example, let's say the input description changed in CRM, right? Say it changed on some other form or outside. I'll show you what that means. I don't want to go into detail about update view because it has a lot of things going on in the update view. Then there's get outputs. Now this is the key. So get outputs is the method that sends the data back to CDS or back to Canvas app or back to model driven app, right? Now, this gets invoked through notify output changed again. Now, here you would see you would always get input description or the properties that are defined as bound, which has usage type as bound. If usage type is defined as input, you won't get it in the get outputs method. And this is the method that sends data back. So so now you know why I was saying that if you are if you have a country or address 1, address 2, or any of those fields, then those fields should be defined as bound and not input. Okay, because you won't be able to send data back to model driven apps. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start writing the code in our TS file. So first thing that we want to do is now remember our little control that we created. What we had in this control is we had a text field. So this is my text field and this is my label. Two things, right? And then I've also added a wrapper around this two controls. So I need one div tag. Under that div tag, I would need I would add my text area and then I would add my label. So that is what I'm going to define in my code. Okay, so if you're following along, then now it's the time that you can start writing the code. So first thing is my HTML elements. So private element. So my main div tag. So now so because I'm creating my UI using TypeScript, I have to first define my variables in HTML. So these are my variables. So I've defined 3 variables, my div tag, and I have to define the type that it is going to support. So it is going to be HTML div element. And it's simple. It's not that complicated. It's not hard. You just define a variable and then define the variable type. So here you can define string, you can define number if you have not worked with TypeScript before. So similarly, you can also define HTML tags here as well. So you can get all the HTML tags that you already that you have been using in past when you design your HTML. So in this case, we are going to do HTML div element, right? And then I'm going to add another variable. It's going to be my text box, and this is going to be HTML text area. Then another element is going to be my label. So output label, and it's going to be HTML label. HTML label element. Okay, so 3 things I've defined here. Now, once I define that, I can go and define my my UI. So as I said, init method is the first method that gets invoked, and I want to design my UI in my init method is what I've decided. Okay, so I'm going to create my UI here. Right. So first thing is now I've defined my elements, but I have to I've declared it, but I've not defined it. So I've declared it here, but now I'm going to define it here. So main div, and then main div, what my main div is going to be. So it's going to be document dot create element, and what type of element I want to create. I've said that it's my element is of type div, right? So I have to give div here, otherwise it's not going to work. So if I say I give text area here, it's going to the TypeScript is going to throw me an error saying that text area does not align with div element. What are you talking about? I don't know what this means, right? So we have to make sure that our element that we are creating or defining matches to the declaration of the variable. So that's why this is going to be div. Similarly, we're going to do it for our text box, and text box is going to be our text area, and the other one is going to be our output label. Okay, so we have defined these 3 elements here. Now, what you want to do is you want to add this to the framework's UI. So framework provides you with a container as part of the init method. Now this is only part of the init method. This container is not provided anywhere else in the code if you see. So this is only provided in the init method itself. Okay, but how it works is first thing that gets added would be the first thing that gets shown. Okay, and now what I want is I want my text area and label to be added into this div tag, and this div tag will ultimately get added into this containers div tag, which is the framework's div tag. Okay, so element main dot add, append child. I'm adding my text area, text box inside my div tag, and then I'll add my label inside my div tag. Now I'll add my own div tag into this container that is part of the framework. So container dot append child, and then I'll say element main div, and that's it. That's how I created my UI. Okay, I haven't done anything else. I've just created the UI. Okay, let's save it, and let's go and test this. Any questions so far until while this is building?
I have a quick question here. So you added the text area. Sorry if I missed that if you said it. But why we don't use the already provided text area by CRM? Like you want to replace the description field with a text area of your own, right?
Yes.
Why can we use the one that's provided by CRM directly?
You can, yeah. That's up to you. You can, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just showing you how that bound works, and I wanted to show how the return works, like how you can return the data back. That's why I choose this example. But yeah, it's up to you how you wanna build your control.
Because like if it's a single line text, I don't want to render it as a text area, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't think you the question. You cannot use the control that's showing on the form like the CRM. If you did not add any control in the init, your control will show anything?
No, so you can. So the way you can do that is you add your attribute twice on the form. That's what I have done here. So I can show you. So here I have the zip code. Okay, and this my control demo zip code is binded to zip code and country code. So it's binded to zip code and country code. Now this control does not show or does not take inputs. So what I've done is I've added my zip code twice on the form. One is the out of the box attribute that CRM provides, and the other one is actually the custom control. So if you go on the form and you look at the summary section, you would see that I can I replaced that with a custom control recently. Let me just go back and then remove that. But you got the idea, right? You can add the control twice.
So the logic of your custom control will be like applied once you do the changes in the zip code.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
right. Okay. So, yeah. So in this case, here my control would be still loading. You cannot see the control yet, but let me. Oh, there you go. See, it shows the control. It doesn't have the input. The input is actually provided from here, right? So I can do, if I change, let me know any zip code. Do you know any zip code? Any?
Worldwide? Yeah, 3108, let's suppose.
3108, that's it?
Yeah, yeah.
This is of which country?
Australia.
Australia. Australia, there we go. Oh, 3108.
Yep.
Yeah. For some reason, it doesn't take Australia. Oh, it needs AU. AU. There you go. Doncaster.
Okay, so yeah, exactly. That's right. Now I have a quick question actually. So why you need to put that zip code twice on the form?
Yeah, so one is to keep the out of the box functionality and other one is to render your control. Because if I don't put the zip code, where is the user going to enter the zip code?
Okay, why can't you have an input field for that?
So you can do it two ways. It's up to you. So that is what I have done. I have added an input field for my description. Input, I mean the bound field for the description, right?
Yes.
But I think so it was Omar who asked the question, right? But Omar was saying, why do we want to add a text field as a bound field? Because his question is right, because if it's going to be a single line text, then he doesn't want to show a text area. And if it's a text area, then you want to show a text area and not a single line text. So the logic would depend. So you could do it either way. If your control is not expecting any input and it is just going to show or display the data, then you can add it twice and let the input be entered via out of the box CRM functionality. And then your control can render the output by itself based on the data.
Okay. See, I think I'm getting the idea about like your zip code stuff as well, but your zip code, it's completely fine. Like, you know, what Umar has asked, and it makes sense. But I think I'm trying to understand the, like, you know, other way around of like the way you have implemented it. It's actually like, you know, interesting the way you have done it, because technically your zip code, you're trying to change the behavior, but you need to have a value for that, right? Like where that the value would come from, right? That's the whole idea. Right. And for that, it's like you have different ways to do it. One is either you can provide the input field, which is a HTML tag or HTML input field. You can provide that into your control itself, where it would take the value, or you can take the value from the CRM field and, you know, work it out.
Right. So here's the thing. And when you're defining a control, you have to think what is the advantage you're providing to the control, right? So in my case, I'm not trying to change the input. I'm trying to give more information from the input. Whereas some of the controls like arc knob that comes out of the box, that arc knob is trying to change the way you input the data. So if you're trying to change the way the user wants to input the data, then you replace it with your control, right?
Makes sense. Makes sense. I think I get your idea, which is like, you know, you're trying to change the behavior of a field itself, that the way you would take the input of the field, right? But in your case, you are trying to add more value to the field itself. So that's why you change the behavior. But it makes sense completely.
Yeah. Okay. So actually we are short on time, so I'm gonna rush through some of the things, but if not, then we can extend it if you guys are okay with it. Okay, so now as you can see, going back here, we have the text area, but the label is not actually getting shown, but trust me, it's there. Now we have defined our UI. Now things to remember, I clicked on test. The good thing about PCF framework is it is giving us the ability to watch the changes that happens in our on our index file. So anytime anything changes, it rebuilds itself and then reflects it on the test harness. So I don't have to every time close this and then rebuild it and then test it. I can just keep it on and then start doing my changes here, and it would be reflected whenever I do changes. That's very cool. So I'll show you what happens. OK, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to create a function. So as I told you, right, I'm gonna first of all show the data on my text area. So I'm gonna read the data from CRM and I'm gonna show that data on my text area. Because right now, if you see, we don't see anything. The data is that I've added here is val, but I don't see any data over here. OK, so let's do that. So how do I receive the data from CRM or the data that is already existing on the form on that particular field? That happens through context. OK, so context is again part of the framework, which is only provided in the init and the update view method. So context dot, and then you get a lot of other functions that is provided by context. Again, you can go to the reference page and then see what all those things do. Now, in our case, we want to read the parameters or the properties that we have defined. So when you do parameters dot, it would give you two parameters that we had defined in the manifest file. We are only interested in the input description, right? So dot raw, or you can even use formatted, or you can use raw. It gives you the attribute logical name, if it's option set, or I've never used attributes, so I'll have to check what it does. But if there's an error, it gives you the error. It's a Boolean. It shows you if there is an error message, then it gives you the error message, provides you the security. If a field security is applied, then it gives you the security type. And then the raw gives you the raw information or raw data of that particular attribute, and formatted gives you the formatted data of that attribute. So I'm going to use raw in my case, and I'm going to assign it to my text box. So text box dot value is equal to raw, but sometimes raw could be undefined or null, right? So null in TypeScript is undefined. So I cannot assign undefined to a text box value, because it only takes in string, as you can see here. But raw gives me string, and also it gives me undefined. So just to make sure that I'm not assigning undefined, if it is undefined, then it will be assigned an empty string. OK, now as soon as I save it, this would refresh. You'll see that it refreshes after a few seconds, and there you go. It refreshes, and this val that was provided in the property appears in my text box. Now, if I change any value over here, nothing would happen because I haven't written anything on my update view. What happens is whenever I change the value, the update view gets invoked. But because there's nothing written in my code on the update view, nothing would happen. This init, as I said, gets invoked only once. OK, so now let's go and write some code on the update view. So update view, it would be similar. The only thing is I need to just do this on the update view and save it. Now, if I go back here, you would see it refreshed and the value is over here. I remove this and the value gets updated over here. So as soon as I type something, it gets shown over here. Simple, right? Now, now what I want is I want to calculate the number of characters and number of count, right? So for that, I'm going to write a function here, and I'm just going to copy it over, and I can explain you what that does. So what this function does is it's an onChange function, and onChange function, and it calls calculate number of characters. It takes the text box value length, splits it up to do a word count, and then does a character count. It's pretty simple. And then I update my label with the inner HTML with the character count and with the word count. OK, pretty simple, straightforward function. You can do whatever you want. But this is not the focus. Our focus is how do I assign an event to my controls. So in this case, my onChange event is over here, right? I want to assign it to my text area. Correct. So how do I bind it to my text area? So in the text area, I would do element text box is equal to this dot onChange dot bind, and I'm going to say this. This is how I bind my onChange. Oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. This is add event listener. Sorry, add event listener, and the event is going to be change. And here is where I'm going to bind it. Okay. So what I did is I added an event listener on onChange event. You get so you can get all this onChange, click, all those events that are applicable to a text box are available over here. So I want change event, and onChange event I assign my event over here. Okay, make sense? Now, because my onChange event is here, let's go and save it, and it should reflect. Label is not. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So my onChange event is reflecting and showing me the character count and the word count. Okay. Now this is not looking pretty, but we once we add the CSS files in my manifest file, then I should be able to get some nice looking control. Now, as I said before, if my controls or PCF controls always inherits the CSS properties from their parent. So that's a nice way, because we are running in the test harness. We don't have any CSS applied on a parent. There's no parent, right? But if this control, if I take it as is and put it in CRM, then it would look a little different, because it would apply the parents. It would inherit the parent CSS. Now, because now let's so are you guys okay extending for another 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So now we looked at the update view, we looked at the init view, and we assigned the event listener. But if you see, going back on the test harness, the value, if I change any value, let's change the value. It's calculating the characters and calculating the change the value. It's calculating the characters and calculating the words, but it's not reflecting back to its source. This is the reason, like it's not reflecting back. It should always reflect back. You see that it's always yeah, it's not reflecting back because we haven't assigned any get outputs method. Okay, get outputs, as I said, is the one that returns data back. So in this, it's pretty simple here as well, is input description. And what would the input description would be is element text box dot value. Okay, that's it. But this get outputs should get invoked, or we as a developer, we should tell the framework when to call get outputs. In this case, we want to call get outputs whenever the onChange event is invoking and whenever this calculate number of characters is getting invoked, right? So there's a special property called notify output changed. So this is a function that is invoked, or we can invoke this function to let framework notify that the output has changed. Okay, and to do that, because it is only available in the int method, we have to create a global variable of the same type. So what I do is I call private, and then I just copy this entire thing. This is pretty, like I'm showing you some tricks, and I say the, and then I just paste whatever I copied it from there. Okay, so I've just created a copy of the same parameter that is available in the init method, and I created a global variable. And as soon as the init method gets invoked, I will assign that to my global variable. Okay, so now I have the access to this notify output changed on my global variable, and then I'm going to use this and invoke this in my onChange events method. So I'm going to say the notify output change, and I'm just going to invoke this method. And this would invoke the get outputs, and get outputs would return the input descriptions with the text box value. So if I go back here and it's refreshed already, this is changed. And now you see I got this input description. This is changed is reflecting here, and it's also reflecting here as well. OK, this is why we need to have bound. Character limit is an input value, and it cannot be returned back. So if you want to return anything back to CRM or to Canvas app, then you have to use bound. OK, any questions?
Can you just go back to the code? Actually, I just need to.
Yeah, sure, I can.
Okay, in the init method, please. Okay. All right. So once you do the notify output change, you obviously you actually assign it to the global function. Now, if we go to the get output delegate, yeah. So if we are saying that assign the text box value back to the input description, the point is you are trying to trigger the notify output change on the onChange method. If we don't do that, wouldn't it automatically take the value in the get outputs and put it back into the input description?
No, it doesn't, because get outputs is not invoked unless and until you invoke it, unless and until you tell the framework that, hey, I've changed the output in my code. Now go and do the changes on the source. Because see,
Okay, I get it.
your element is in your control. Framework doesn't, or CRM doesn't have any idea what is going on with your elements, because you have one attribute bound, but in your UI you can have hundreds of elements. Now when do you want to invoke this get outputs? You have to let the framework know when to invoke that, or when to let the output method know that the output has changed. And I can even returning doesn't have to necessarily be the value. I can actually do like crazy thing over here. Let's say this is gonna also append some DN to it, something like that. It could be complicated. The get outputs could also be complicated return. Doesn't have to be necessarily as simple as this. This is just giving you an idea of what you can do and how you need to do it.
Okay, makes sense. So it's simply like you have to trigger the get outputs, you have to trigger the notify change actually.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. There are scenarios where get outputs gets invoked automatically, but we'll look into that later.
Okay.
Any other questions anyone has?
Yes. So when we use when and how we use the destroy method?
Yes. So destroy method is only used when you are you want to clean up, like you wanna you have, let's say, a web API call, and it's a asynchronous web API call, but it hasn't finished, and someone just navigated away from the form or closed the form. Then the destroy method will get invoked, and then you can you know clean up your code, or you can disconnect your web API call. Or let's say you're working with a React component and you have loaded a React. Now you have to unmount a React from your div tag. So those kind of things are what you would do in your destroy method. And destroy method is only invoked when your control is getting unloaded.
Okay.
Okay. So when you change the value in your control text box, the update view method is called, right?
Yes.
So can we use the update view method instead of the get output, because it will also get called?
So update view method is only to update your control with the values. It won't return any data back to CRM. And now, as you have seen, I've not used xrm.page. I've not used form context. This context that we are talking about is a frameworks like PCF's context. This is not form context, right? So I'm the way I have to, the way I can send the data back is only through get outputs. So if I don't do anything in the get outputs, and if I go back here and let this refresh, okay, this got refreshed, right? And I type in something here, it calculates the characters, it calculates the word, but it's not returning the data back to the source. This is my source.
Yeah, but I think the source text box, it is available in the property that we have.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'll show you one thing here. If I don't return my value back, then unsafe changes will not get invoked, because on change event on that particular attribute will not get invoked because it doesn't understand the value got changed. The value is changing in your control only, not in your database or not on your form. That's the difference, because you are isolated. It's kind of an isolated control from your actual control. So if I change anything here, and if I don't have get outputs, then I won't get this unsafe changes over here.
Okay.
And that value would not be saved in CRM.
Okay, got your point.
Yeah.
So get output is called actually by CRM, right? It's just when we notify the change, it's just we are telling CRM we are ready for you to just read whatever we changed.
Exactly, right. It doesn't save the data. It just notifies CRM that the value of that attribute got changed. And if I have multiple bounds, I can do multiple return over here as well. So like say zip and country were two bound fields, and zip and country is something that I'm changing in my control. I can return zip and country in my outputs. It doesn't have to be one single output. Anyone else has any other questions?
So Dinesh, the destroy method, like, in technically whatever the container we have right now, can we destroy that container into the destroy method?
Well, this would get automatically. You don't need to destroy the elements, because elements will be removed from the DOM when the control gets removed from the DOM. So you don't necessarily have to destroy this.
But what about the global? What about the global event that we created?
Yes, the global event definitely. We might wanna, but this is a blank function. So I don't think so we need to do anything over here as well. I don't, yeah. Let's see. Destroy. Notify dot. There's no, there's nothing in this where you can do destroy. Notify. Yeah, it doesn't even take this, because this is a blank function. So you don't need to destroy that. It's just a pointer, right?
Okay.
Yes, or maybe in the destroy method, you destroy your event listener that you add to your text box.
Yes, the event listener. Yes, definitely. You can unmount this event listener. You can do remove event list. Yes, that you can do for sure. Yeah. But there's no way I can show you what happens in the backend. But we just have to trust the system that it would do it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Kind of a garbage collector.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. This code is actually available on GitHub, right? This control itself.
Yes, I will send the links.
Perfect.
After the call.
Okay.
Any other question,
Yeah.
guys? I mean, again, it doesn't necessarily you have to ask the questions now. We'll again meet, and I've kept a special session just for Q&A at the end of all the sessions. So if you remember any questions, say after like a week, note it down, and then during that sessions we can go through all the questions that you guys have. Perfect. Or you can ask me in the next session as well. Okay.
Okay. So we haven't, like, in the I think so we are not doing any deployments today. We are just testing it in a local machine, so which is fine. Localhost.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's our third session, how to do deployments, how to work with
perfect.
CDS projects and all those stuff.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, and see you on Tuesday.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so
That
much.
was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Yes. Bye bye.